All right, hey nerds. So, going to talk about my favorite Hegelian slash Lacanian slash Marxist philosopher, Slavoj Zizek again. He's being asked a question about what him being accused for being racist because he's talking about problems with Muslim culture in Europe, according to him, which is interesting because it sounds like a right wing view, even though he's obviously a self proclaimed Marxist. But anyway, he, as usual, also said the poster asks him the question and then he goes off into like 18 different tangents, but then he somewhat tries to bring it back, but doesn't entirely manage to do so. But he has many fascinating and deliberately contentious opinions as usual too. So let's get into the clip here.
Have you read the recent current affairs article from Slavoj Zizek, racist reactionary with Charlton, and what's your response to it?
It made me sad, not of the reasons that you think. I even replied briefly. I will. Now the guy wrote another short text claiming that I even more charlatan and so on. Okay. Now it's difficult to answer generally because there are detailed quotes and so on and so on. What made me sad, because as a good old Stalinist, and I mean this ironically, we live in such stupid times that you always have to emphasize it. I mean it ironically, I have spies in that circle, so I know who is behind it. It's the boss of that current affairs journal, Nathan Robinson, and behind him is Chomsky. It's Chomsky's revenge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's very sad. It's interesting. It's a leftist, as it were, revenge again. But you know what really did hurt me a little bit? That reproach which I all the time get on I'm secretly a racist and so on and so on. You know what's the first thing that fascinates me here? I'm often criticized as Islamophobic racist and so on. But it's very interesting, never, almost never from Muslims themselves. My books are pirated, they're popular. I visited West Bank. It was wonderful.
Yeah, lefties are calling him Islamophobic. It's like, not according to him anyway, Muslims are not actually calling him Islamophobic racist. And I'm not so sure that Noam Chomsky himself actually said that, but he's the type of person like Western liberals, like he was talking about, who are easily going to accuse people of that if they're talking about Muslim culture. Apparently, even if they're on the side of Palestine and against Israel and the Israel and Palestine conflict, which I'm sure Slavoj Zizek and Noam Chomsky agree about. But it's interesting how he's saying that there, and it's entirely possible. But I kind of doubt that in terms of Noam Chomsky, because he's somewhat a liberal, although I think he would reject that term because he's kind of a anarcho-syndicalist, but he's like a socialist or lefty anarcho-syndicalist. But anyway, that's interesting as usual.
It's wonderful there. They accepted my distances towards the predominant form of Islam and so on and so on. I consider this, my enemy here is this West European liberal guilt-feeling, we Europeans are the worst responsible for everything and so on and so on. Are they aware that political correctness is something exclusively Western? I cannot imagine a more Western cultural phenomenon than political correctness. As to that part,
that's interesting.
No, okay, let me, where the guy appears to be relatively convincing. She quotes me and then claims that I in a totally unjustified way, attribute to Muslim youth pedophilia. It's total lie. Precisely, read my text. This is in which book of mine? I think Traveling Paradise. No, it's against the double black page. Precisely not to appear Islamophobic. I draw a parallel, and this is what fascinates me in all countries today. I draw a parallel between, and the left doesn't want to talk about it here, but I think we should. Remember 3-4 years ago, the Rotterdam scandal, where Pakistani youth gangs were raping white girls. But my point is, not white girls in the racist sense. They selected them very well, poor white girls, to be sure. Okay, and I draw a parallel between these and the phenomenon.
See, according to him, they were targeting poor white girls, not just white girls. So, like, targeting more vulnerable people. Although, obviously, it's pretty much the case that this is not indicative of like a general trend among Muslims, and I don't think he's making that claim either. He's just talking about like popular stories that occurred.
Well known also in your beautiful country, Catholic pedophilia. Which is also, my thesis is just this.
We're gonna go back.
Every cultural
forum says that.
Okay, and I draw a parallel between this and the phenomenon well known also in your beautiful country, Catholic pedophilia. Also, my thesis is just this
country, Catholic pedophilia.
Every cultural forum usually has its own what I call political unconscious. And my point is that in the same way that obviously what Pakistani youth people did there to girls they were raping, it was not simply youthful brutality. That's my point. It's part of a culture. Every culture has also its obscene underside. In the same way that, and I read very good critical Catholic.
So he's saying that it's part of the culture in the Middle East where people happen to be Muslim. It's not a function of Islam or Muslims themselves. It's not inherently related to Islam or Muslims. It's related to cultures in those locations at this point in history.
Pedophilia is a kind of underground of Catholic identity. If nothing else, you can clearly see this from how the church reacts to it. You know, how strictly, in Slovenia at least, we have the same problem. The line of the church is, this is our problem, and they put pressure on parents not to report it to police, and so on and so on. And it's not only them. For example, I forgot in which of my
Oh
books
shit! I just realized I still have this on 2 times speed. Probably way too fast for anyone watching. There we go.
In Travel of Paradise, which one? I give also examples from other cultures like Mexico and Canada, because it's so fashionable to be against United States today. But I read a good analysis, Mexican friends sent them to me, about this. Mexico and South Africa are emerging as the new capitals of rape. No? And
Capitals of rape.
In Mexico City, the situation is so horrible that they introduced separate cars for men and women because rapes were so regular in the subway of Mexico City. And cars for women are protected by police, which means rapes go on and so on. And the obscenity is...
So they started a caste system apparently to protect women from getting raped. That's interesting. It's counterintuitive.
Incredible. The only victim, some parents, girls tried to prosecute rapists because everybody knows who they are. You know what the police did? Not only they did nothing, but they published the name and address and photo of this girl, and she's now threatened and so on. Canada, similar.
So this is probably an isolated case, and he's sounding like Jordan Peterson with the Muslim rape gangs in Europe here. But I think he's, again, talking about a specific case, and he's perhaps not clarifying enough that it's related to like culture in that part of the world at this point in history. But there are like terrible rapes that have happened, and that's obviously awful.
I have some contacts in Vancouver and know there how they are dealing with. There is a whole subculture, and this is my point. It's not just wild subconscious explosion, it's a culture of kidnapping and raping local indigenous Inuit or Native American, whatever you call them, girls there. And this is what we should...
Yeah, I don't think that's actually true, because I've actually been to this place that he's talking about. I've visited Vancouver many times, and I have relatives who live there, so I've spent a lot of time there. And maybe there's certainly like really fucking seedy parts of downtown Vancouver, and you know, obviously they're rapists in all cultures, but I don't think it's disproportionately leaning towards Muslims, especially in Vancouver. I mean, maybe this happened a couple of times, and I haven't even heard of this. The Muslim people kidnapping and raping indigenous women. There's certainly not a fucking underground subculture of that in Vancouver. That's bullshit.
Should be attentive to these brutal rapes and so like in, which is the city south of El Paso, the big Mexican city on the border, they also have a big culture of gang rapes. It's totally ridiculous.
That wouldn't surprise me. It's like run by cartels.
It's not wild explosion. A group of 40 boys kidnap a poor girl who works in a factory, which renders her independent. That annoys the man. And I will not go into detail how, cutting her breasts with a scissors.
Jesus
Nightmare.
Christ, that's horrifying.
But you know what's my point here? It's not, oh my God, crazy, irrational. It's part of a culture. And this is my point. I was not elevating Pakistan youth as something particular. I say, when you want to understand a culture, be courageous enough and look at its obscene subconscious, as it were. In the same way, that's my ultra-classical model. As, for example, in American South, in the golden era of Ku Klux Klan, you know, we are all Christians, blah, 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 but it was part of their culture, that white culture, of course, that during the weekend, let's kidnap some black boys, let's lynch them, and so on and so on.
Rape culture.
This is my big obsession, this dark, obscene underground of a culture. And within this context, I think that we should not be afraid. You know what is really my fear? For example, in Germany and some other countries. Of course, there are problems with immigrants. Of course, they have other ethical standards, but it's absolutely prohibited to mention it. I mean, for example, even
Yeah, I
now,
mean there is a cultural class, and inevitably, regardless of how hardcore the consequences get.
newspapers, if an immigrant raped somebody, it's usually not mentioned that he was an immigrant. I think this is a catastrophic mistake, because in this way you open up the way to right-wing populist paranoia and so on and so on. So
Yeah, if
my
you
point,
spread the news that immigrants are doing that, then it opens up the door for right-wing populists going and lynching Muslim people because they've been falsely accused of raping white women.
is that we should approach the problem of immigrants and so on in a slightly different way. Yes, we should take full responsibility. We Europeans, but also Americans, Russians, are guilty of it. There would have been no wave of immigrants without American intervention in Iraq, without the mess in Syria, without mega mistake of toppling Gaddafi there, and so on. That's
Entirely
true.
possible.
But that's why we should not approach it as a humanitarian problem, but as a global politico-economic problem. What does it happen if you are a little bit more open towards immigrants, but the war in Yemen is going on now? The mega catastrophe, what we allowed Turkey to do with Kurds.
It is certainly true that all the American unnecessary wars in the Middle East has dramatically increased immigration from those countries.
So on and so on. So my true paranoia is this one. Those in power like to play tolerant liberals, and they like nothing more than to bring into conflict the underprivileged. Now it's ideal in Europe. Upper middle classes, liberal, tolerant, and they can reproach their own working classes. You don't
He's
tolerate
talking
the
about that political correctness that he mentioned earlier, like the pearl clutching liberals.
immigrants and so on. Nothing nicer than this. So again, uh, I, I think that the only way, and it can be done, to deal with these problems is to talk openly about them. I'm not saying we Europeans should impose our values as higher or whatever. I think that we should
Good.
nonetheless talk about differences openly, and the way of solidarity for me is to always, like, the way of solidarity is not we are all brothers human, but it's you have your own dark side, we also have it. Let's build solidarity here.
Yeah. Allow our dark sides to bond together. Yeah, he's talking about that controversial topic, like so-called Muslim rape gangs in Europe, basically mostly. But yeah, and I don't think necessarily Slavoj Zizek, or not Slavoj Zizek, Noam Chomsky called Slavoj Zizek a racist, actually, but people who have similar political ideologies have said that, and he doesn't think that that Noam Chomsky would disagree with them, which is also entirely possible. But yeah, of course, Slavoj Zizek spends most of the time talking about pedophilia and Muslim rape culture, mostly Muslim, but also, the secret seedy underground of Catholic pedophilia too. So yeah, as usual, Slavoj Zizek likes to get dark and joke around about dark subjects. And yeah, as usual, he's a very entertaining shit disturber. All right, adios.